All right. Thank you, all of you, so much for being here at our middle grade and YA Spotlight. For you watching, we have three incredible authors today, and they're going to go around and introduce themselves, starting with Crystal Maldonado. And I should mention also that I am Mora Couch, Associate Editor at Holiday House.
All right. Hi, everyone. I am Crystal Maldonado, author of Fat Chance Charlie VEGA. It's a young adult book that's coming out February 2, 2021. And I'm very excited about it. So it tells the story of a 16-year-old girl named Charlie VEGA, who is a couple of things. So she is fat, she is Puerto Rican, and she's never been kissed. And that last one is totally killing her. So her story is about, trying to find love and figure herself out and, just exist as a teen.
Cass?
All right, so I'm Cassandra Rose Clarke, and I am the author of Forget This Ever Happened, which came out at the start of October, very appropriate for spooky season. So Forget This Ever Happened is a young adult Philip K. Dick meets Fear Street queer romance with lots of monsters, lots of sci-fi, and lots of 90s references. And I think it's a lot of fun.
Julie?
Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Lee, author of Brother's Keeper, which is the story of a 12-year-old girl who flees from North Korea during the Korean War. It's middle grade historical fiction, and it came out this past summer. And this is my debut novel.
Lovely. Thank you all. So we're going to have some questions and responses today. So let's get right into it. So first of all, Crystal and Julie, both of your books are debuts, which we are so excited about. What is something that surprised you most about the process of writing your first book?
Well, I'm happy to jump in. I've got a lot of thoughts, so.
Go ahead, Crystal.
So during the actual writing process, I feel like I was surprised by how nervous I was to be putting something together that I was going to have to share with people. So for the longest time, I had written just for fun and not really gave it to anybody else to read. And this was a book that I felt like, oh my God, I'm writing this with the goal of hopefully having other people read it. And that was both very exciting and also completely terrifying. And then during the revision process and the whole process of actually making this book come to life and, get on the bookshelves, I was really surprised by how easily actually, Mora, you and I got along. I felt like you understand the book, you understood the book immediately, and your notes in the editing process would sometimes make me laugh out loud, and I feel like that's not allowed for editing. So I was very pleasantly surprised by that, and I feel like we ended up with a great final product.
Oh, thank you, Crystal. That's so kind. Julie?
I think what surprised me most was how much the characters began to consume my thoughts and take on a life of their own. I really wasn't expecting that. And after a while, I would say maybe after the midpoint of the novel, it became easier to write because the characters just sort of started talking themselves and doing what they wanted. In some way, I felt like I just had to step aside and let that happen.
Yeah. So Cassandra, Forget This Ever Happened has so many different fantastical elements, from telepathy to time dilation to talking monsters. How did you come up with these elements, and where do you think some of your inspiration came from?
So I, as a writer, really like writing weird stuff. So my mantra is always the weirder, the better. So I kind of come into writing with the expectation that I'm going to try to get as much weird things in there as I can. For Forget This Ever Happened specifically, I was really kind of inspired by Philip K. Dick, who I read quite a lot as a teenager. So a lot of the time dilation and that sense of reality not being real, or what is reality, a lot of that came from obsessively reading Philip K. Dick books as a teenager. And then I also was kind of inspired by cosmic horror stories with the monsters, because I really wanted the monsters to feel completely inhuman, but they're also kind of nice. So it was kind of an interesting, it was sort of interesting thing to play around with, where it's I'm pulling from a lot of cosmic horror sort of inspirations, but they're not horror monsters, if that makes sense.
Great. Yes, definitely see all of that in the book. So guys, since all of your books are own voices, how much do you think that you drew from your own life experiences or those of your family to create your characters' personalities and stories? So let's start with Julie.
Well, all the characters in Brothers Keeper are based on people I know in my family and in my life. When I wrote Soda, who is the protagonist in my story, I of course thought of my mother, um, who inspired this story, and she's always been very strong, compassionate and brave. But I also thought of my daughters who are still young and will snap at each other one minute and laugh together the next. And ultimately, though, I think I have to be able to relate to all of my characters and see a bit of myself in each of them, even Amini, who was Soda's very harsh and strict mother. In terms of story, Brothers Keeper was inspired by my mother's life, and many of the incidents in the book were drawn from her actual experiences, such as the flashback with the man who was not her uncle, the bombing on the hill, sleeping in abandoned houses, and riding on that packed train to Busan.
Thank you. And Crystal?
So I would agree that a lot of the stories and the characters and things that happen in Fat Chance Charlie Vega are based on my personal experiences. So like Charlie, I grew up in a white town as a fat Puerto Rican girl who often kind of felt othered and struggled with these ideas about my own body where I'm, trying to love myself, but also feeling like the society is kind of weighing on me and not wanting me to feel that way. So there were definitely kernels of things I experienced that are now, heavily fictionalized as they are. One thing that I like to share that is actually true to the book is that the character of Brian, who is the love interest, is actually based on my real life husband. So my husband likes to take all the credit for Brian. So there is that. But Charlie's story ends up being, uniquely hers, and her voice is super distinct to who Charlie is. And she also ends up having way better fashion sense than I did at that age. So she has that going for her.
Great. Cass?
Yeah, so the kind of queer romance aspect of Forget This Ever Happened, I basically wrote with the idea of writing the book that I needed to read when I was a teenager, and I was bisexual. It was the early 2000s, and I didn't really know. There were not the resources available then that are now. So Claire in particular is really based on my own experiences of kind of uncovering that about herself, and sort of learning to kind of navigate that space. So yeah, that was kind of, so she's like very much like me, not even just being bisexual, like just her personality, and her music choice and stuff was very much inspired by me. So
She has great taste in music. Going on from that, what do you guys all hope readers take away from your books? And let's go reverse and start with Cass.
So I honestly, the biggest takeaway is I hope that people just have like a fun time reading it. Because I wrote it to be sort of like those cool like 90s teen horror books, which were like I devoured because they're just fun to read. So that's like my biggest takeaway, honestly. And of course I like that there's the queer romance and that aspect of it, but I really just want people to read it and be like, oh yeah, that was awesome. There were monsters and time didn't make any sense. And I also hope people come out shipping Claire and Julie.
For sure. Crystal?
So a big thing that I would love to have this book do is just to help, fat brown girls feel like they see themselves sort of reflected back on the page. That's huge for me and is a big part of why I wanted to write this, was because I feel like representation is just so important and so meaningful. And then I also hope, anybody who reads this who maybe deals with some kind of insecurity, as we all do, they sort of get the message that you don't need to be perfect, whatever perfect is, in order to start loving yourself and being kind to yourself.
Great. And Julie?
And as you know, Brothers Keeper takes place during the Korean War, which is also known as the Forgotten War. So my hope is that readers, that they will know that no history should be forgotten. I hope that they'll become more curious and compassionate about people from around the world. And I hope that, like Mora, they never give up on their dreams.
That's wonderful. And so let's talk briefly about age ranges. Julie, obviously you're writing for middle grade audience, but Cass and Crystal, you're writing for teens. How did you pick that age range and how do you guys get in the headspace? Let's start with Cass.
I mean, I just wanted to write a YA novel. Like that was that was why I picked it. I actually write across age ranges. I've written for adults. And I was kind of in the mood to write a YA novel, so that was why I chose it. I really pulled from my own experiences, which was easy to do because the book is a period piece and it's set in the early 90s. So there were, teens in the early 90s probably had a similar experience that I did in the early 2000s compared to teens now. But I also was kind of, especially with Mora's help, was sort of like, what would teens now think is cool about this time period? So I was kind of, a lot of times I was just like, what would TikTok like? Like movies, like when I'm talking about movies or music or like fashion stuff. So that was kind of how I navigated it.
Fun. Crystal?
So there is I'm a huge fan of young adult novels to start. Like I devour them. I love them. I'm like totally obsessed with them. But there's also like a big part of me that just loves and like wants to protect teen girls. I feel like we're so hard on them and they deserve like so much love and respect. And you're like when you're a teenager, things feel so awkward and you're just figuring yourself out and you're just on the cusp of like so much of like becoming yourself kind of thing. And I just find that the more that we can make stories that sort of help people figure themselves out or see themselves represented or whatever that might be, the better, and so I really had, just young girls in mind when I was writing this, and getting into the mindset of a teen girl was kind of easy, I feel like, because I feel like I still think I'm a teenager sometimes. So there's that. But I did listen to a ton of music that I loved growing up so that I could get back into all those feelings. And also I'm totally obsessed with TikTok. So mine is like set now. So I try to like watch a bunch and figure out, oh, what are teens up to these days?
And Julie?
I mean, I love middle grade because it's such an interesting time. I feel like kids at this age are at that pivotal juncture when so many things are changing. I mean, like their bodies, their growing minds, and they begin to wonder who they are and what their place is in the world. And at this age, they're also sometimes led by these, childlike controlling beliefs, while at the same time awakening to seeing things in a more adult way. And I think all these things make for a compelling protagonist. And in Brother's Keeper, Mora is experiencing all of these middle grade age challenges as a 12-year-old. But on top of that, she has to navigate a treacherous journey south on her own in the middle of a war. And the fact that she's 12 as opposed to an older teen who might already know how to find her way, I think raises the tension and stakes in the story. And as for getting into the mind of a middle grade reader, I have 3 children spaced about 3 to 4 years apart. And because of that, I always seem to have a middle grader living in my house. So that's pretty much how I get in the mind.
That's also true. So finally, it would be great if each of you could tell us a fun behind the scenes fact about your book that we wouldn't know without you sharing it today. Let's start with Cass.
So I actually started this book 5 years ago and I was doing SAT tutoring and I wrote the first chapter while waiting, while my SAT tutor student was writing their sample essay, because they would have 25 minutes to write their sample essay and then I would review it. So while they were doing that, I was writing the first chapter and it actually hasn't changed that much. I wrote it by hand on the same notebook paper they were using.
I love that.
Wild origin story. Julie?
Well, when I was writing Brother's Keeper, I was always busy running around out and about. This was pre-pandemic, of course. And I didn't always have time to sit quietly somewhere and write. So throughout the day, I would send emails to myself with sentences that popped into my head or notes about a character or scene. And then later, when I'd return home and sit in front of my computer to write, I'd have a whole slew of emails from myself to go through, which was great, actually. It worked really well for me.
That's actually so smart.
So I mentioned briefly that, you know, Brian in the book is based on my husband. So there is, without giving too much away, there is a scene between Charlie and Brian that sort of revolves around Valentine's Day. It happens in their art class. And my husband actually inspired this entire scene and exchange. So when the two of us were in high school, he actually gave me a Valentine during our art class and made a big show of it. And we were just friends at the time. So it took me by total surprise. And it was like this hand-drawn little, God, one of those like teeny tiny Valentines that he had put together himself, and he gave it to me, and it had a pun on it. And it was like, had a pair of dice, and then you turn it over and it was like paradise, get it? And for some reason, I was just like, oh my God, this guy is so hilarious. And it was the first Valentine I had ever gotten that was beyond like the elementary school Valentines you get that everybody gives you. So I still have it, and it's actually in my wallet, and you know, I look at it from time to time. We've been together for 14 years now, so.
Sweet. All right, that is all the time we have for today, but thank you all so much for being here and for your incredible answers. And I hope you watching will pick up these books. Bye.
Bye.